The main thing to remember about any kind of data-driven macroeconomic conversation is that usually these things are very slow moving. They take a long time to happen, usually, and the trading opportunities are a far longer time horizon conversation. And if you've gone on any kind of financial media, television, internet, whatever, you've probably run into the yield curve inversion. And so let's talk about what that is. It's typically the 2-year, although you can have many, many different yield curve, different durations invert, but probably the most popular to watch is the 2 and 10. So I do want to mention there's probably lots of different combinations, but I would say this is by far the most popular. This 0 line here is actually called that the inversion line, above and below. So you can see here, and I'll show you the exact date. Right here, this would have been the week of April 4, 2022, yield curves for a very brief period of time inverted. And if I go back and we look at news from back then, it probably was a big deal. Well, I've learned over the years that it's not the initial inversion that's actually all that important. It's the re-inversion, so that the second time, that's when we really start to pay attention. All right, so the second, in a close proximity, so we re-inverted basically right there around the beginning of July. So the first inversion was the beginning of April, and then the re-inversion was, April to May, May to June, June to July, 3 months later. All right, now we're talking. Now we're off to the races. And if you take a look at what happened throughout 2022, a lot of you probably remember, 2022 was one of those years that it took 9 months, but there was an over 20% pullback in equities, in many equities, in the indices through that year. And you could say, you know what, Rog? Could we kind of say that was the inversion? Yes. Now here's where sort of hobbyist macro traders, forgetting what their job is, kept talking about the fact that rates are inverted, rates are inverted, rates are inverted. The fact that they're inverted is less important than the re-inversion and the immediacy of that. So really, after about July of 2022, right, we've got to keep an eye on the weakness, which we saw throughout the rest of the year. Great. You can see all this movement. And then things just even psychologically found a range. Here's your low, here's your low. And then after a while, we just don't care. But your hobbyist macro people will say, oh my gosh, this is the beginning of the end. They keep fear-mongering. Even though throughout 2024, we were hitting all-time highs. It's an opportunity cost, right? Okay, we're no longer inverted. So now what? And we've sold off. Was this the inversion warning us? Oh gosh, no, gang. That trade happened in 2022. So this is data from the St. Louis Federal Reserve. It's called FRED data. And you can go pull this up. In fact, if you go to Google and type in 2-year, 10-year inversion chart, FRED, F-R-E-D, it'll bring you this chart right here. Okay? This is how we start to separate between really, frankly, amateur analysts who want to grab data like this and make it a narrative. It's not. And this is how you know now the timing. It's the initial inversion, gets your attention. It's the re-inversion where the chaos can begin. And you can see it was very much what we saw in 2022. Now, there are many different maturities that can, but the most popular is the 2 and 10. So I don't get too carried away with other inversions. The most important, the most well-watched is the 2 and 10 year. So hopefully this is something you can now understand. Take a look on your own, and now you won't be susceptible to chatter that maybe you didn't know you probably already knew how to read. You just needed a graph to do it.